Hello and welcome. I've been actively involved in Microsoft private preview of Microsoft Entra Internet Access and Microsoft Entra Private Access, components of which were released into public preview on the 11th of July. The umbrella name is Global Secure Access, which embodies Zero Trust Network access to M365 services, access to other internet services, and private applications. Those private applications might be hosted in your data center or another cloud. Also included is a major enhancement to tenant restrictions. These services are real game changers, and I want to show you what these new technologies are and how they can enhance your organization's security. If you watched the reimage Secure Access with Microsoft Entra announcement yesterday, you'll have also seen that Azure AD is no more. Before you panic, luckily it's only a name change. Expect to see the name change rolling out over time in all the UXs and the documentation. There's no impact on management or development. This is a long video, but there's a lot to mention. I've done an intro which covers the reasons for the technology. If you want to jump straight to the how it works, check the timeline in the description. Let's get started. Don't forget to subscribe and keep learning. And please click that bell to keep up to date. Come with me into the cloud. I want to start with an introduction, then we'll go and look at client to app connectivity. We'll have to have a look at what internet access is, private access, and then finally universal tenant restrictions. But let's start by actually setting the scene and thinking about what is Microsoft Entra Internet Access? What is Microsoft Entra Private Access? Well, they're umbrellaed in the portal under Global Secure Access. And Microsoft are enhancing their suite of cloud security services to really help with securely connecting anyone from anywhere with any device to applications and services that are anywhere. And of course, doing this in a very secure way. July 2023, well, in fact, it was yesterday, which was the 11th of July, the first features of this new service were released into public preview, which I'm really excited about. Now, I want to just reflect on a couple of key concepts that were coined by Gartner. So the first one was the Secure Access Service Edge, or SASE. That was in 2019. And SASE, with cloud services providing Zero Trust Network Access. I'll come back to that. What is that? Cloud Access Security Broker. Now, Microsoft already have a Cloud Access Security Broker, and that is Defender for Cloud Apps. And the idea is you've got a user who is connecting into an application, and we can monitor what's going on between that application and that user. So we can look and block maybe file downloads, or we can say you can download certain files but not other files. We can look at data loss prevention and have lots of policies involved. Secure Web Gateway, and this is about really protecting your organization from the internet. So blocking access to certain URLs, filtering content, blocking access to certain characteristics of different websites that you may not want your users actually going to. And then Firewall as a Service is another feature built in. And then software-defined wide area networks. Well, if we think about it, we've got a cloud provider providing the most amazing global network. Well, why not allow our users to connect in and use that network and develop it as a software-defined WAN, sort of eliminating the need for MPLS and so on. So in 2021, Gartner coined the phrase security service edge, and basically it's all the security features of SASE without the software-defined WAN. Now, I said I'd come back to ZTNA. ZTNA is Zero Trust Network Access, and we can have various Zero Trust components in our system. But the key thing is we always verify. So it's not about not trusting someone, it's not trusting them once they're in our system without continuously verifying them. So verify explicitly. Every time someone wants to do something, check that they're allowed to do what they're trying to do, and base it on lots of signals. So signals from the device they're on, signals from the device health, and, their identity, obviously, what they're trying to get at, what their geolocation is. Bring all that information in and continuously verify. The next thing is use least privileged access. Now, traditionally, that's always been thought about as administrative roles. So if you don't need to be a global administrator, let's make you an administrator that can just do your task, i.e., least privileged administration. But actually it's way more than that. It's about entitlement as well. What applications is a user allowed to use? Make sure it's only the minimum set. And then we can use application segmentation to limit application access as well. So least privileged access. And the thing is, we have to these days assume breach. We can't assume our systems are protected. So we got to continuously monitor all our resources, combine that with AI, with threat intelligence, bringing in all the signals, consolidating them for extended detection response, automating tasks with playbooks, and so on. So the 3 tenets of ZTNA: verify explicitly, use least privileged access, and assume breach. Now, VPNs have always been very traditional. Hey, how do we get our remote worker onto our network so they can do things? Oh, put up a VPN. The problem is with VPNs, they connect the user to a network or network segment rather than a specific application. And it allows an attacker, and notice I put with credentials. I haven't put with compromised credentials in there, because a huge number of attackers are coming from our internal people with credentials. Once they're coming on the VPN, they're access to multiple resources. They're on the network. They can do reconnaissance. They can do lateral movement. And then, you have a VPN and it's possibly a fixed appliance or appliances, and then connection scaling becomes a problem. You need to scale up more connections because suddenly COVID's come along and suddenly all your workers are working from home. You've got to deal with performance, you've got to deal with redundancy, and it's all challenging, it's all costly. Another disadvantage is clients connecting may have to traverse the internet. Imagine a client at some remote location in another country and they want to get at a SaaS app. And they're coming in through the VPN. So they're coming all the way across the internet to the VPN point. And then maybe they're going all the way back to the country they're in to access the app that's, in a data center just a few hundred yards down the road. And then you've got excessive overhead in managing access to cloud services. So VPNs are not great. Now, if we think about a security service edge, what can it do for us? Well, number one, if it has a global presence, our users connect to the nearest POP, regardless of where they're located. So we're not traversing all over the internet. We're just coming in at a local point of presence. Scalability, performance, redundancy, all managed by the cloud, so we don't even have to think of it. And then what we've got is we can go to our applications And they might be SaaS apps, they might be internet websites, they might be our on-premise apps, or in fact apps that are private to us that are in multi-cloud. And of course, with SSE, we can impose whatever security controls that cloud provider is giving us. So maybe we got firewalls as a service, we've got secure web gateways as a service, we got DLP as a service, and many more different features. All access to the SSE and applications are authenticated and continuously verified. Ticks the box, verify explicitly. Access is limited to application segments, so that gives us our least privileged access. And all traffics and behaviors are constantly monitored, so that deals with our assumed breach. So our 3 tenants from ZTNA, tick, tick, tick. Now, if we're looking at someone providing an SSE service, and it's a cloud provider doing this, what they need is a fast, highly reliable, secure global network. We need geolocated points of presence so where our clients can connect in. We need high performance, reliability and scalability of virtualized services. So if we've got a virtualized firewall, we've got a virtualized gateway of some kind, it needs to be virtualized in the correct location. So that's all got to be geo-distributed and it's got to be fast. And then we need best of breed identity and access management, implementing a zero trust framework. And you need state-of-the-art threat intelligence. Well, you know what? Microsoft ticks all the boxes. So welcome to the public preview of Microsoft Entra Internet Access and Microsoft Entra Private Access. I say it's all bundled under the umbrella of global secure access. I want to start by looking at client to application connectivity. And here I've produced my own sort of diagram or graphic. Microsoft may throw their hands up in horror when they see this, but actually I think it explains the story quite well. You have an edge where your clients connect, and you have an edge where we've got access to the applications. We've got Microsoft Entra ID, which, is the rename of Azure Active Directory. And with Entra ID, we've got authentication and conditional access. Those are 2 core components. So when a client connects, we can actually authenticate to the client edge. And also, when we're going to an application, we can authenticate the user to the application as well and impose conditional access policies. And then, of course, between the two, we can input in any other security controls that might be available. And then we make the service worldwide. So everything is geolocated in terms of our points of presence and so on. So we have a client who wants to connect. It establishes a secure authenticated tunnel. And to do that, our client's going to be running a GSA client. Now, at the moment, there's only a GSA client available for Windows 10 or 11, but they will become more available. And there's an alternative to a GSA client as well, which I will talk about shortly. Now, on the connection, we've got this secure authenticated tunnel established, and I'll go through that in another video, the details of that tunnel. We've got the user is authed, and also I've got CA evaluation. So with CA evaluation is where's the user coming from, what's the device they're at, is the device compliant, and so on. We can check all of that. Really rich, secure evaluation. So assuming we're on the edge, but you might be thinking, well, hang on a minute. Why did we send the traffic to the edge? Well, that's where we get our traffic forwarding profiles. So there's a traffic forwarding profile for Microsoft 365. There's one for private access, which is access to our private applications, and there's one for internet access. Now, Microsoft 365, if you like, is a subset of internet access. 365 access, private access is there in the public preview that's now available. Internet access will follow at some point in the future. These traffic forwarding profiles define what traffic should be forwarded to the edge. And that information is actually sent to the client, or the client downloads that information. It stores that information in a registry key. And, in another video, I will show you that registry key and how we can look at the traffic profile. We got our client connected. The next thing is connecting to the application. So in terms of the Entra internet access, one of those components is M365. So it's specially called out because M365 also has tenant restrictions associated with it as well. And again, I'll talk more about tenant restrictions shortly. We've got connections to SaaS apps and internet websites. And we've got connections to the Entra private access, which is all those great things that are private to us. And they might be on-prem, they might be in one of many different clouds. So we can deal with multi-cloud environments. And remember, when we're going to the apps, we are going to be authenticating. We're also going to be running conditional access policies. Now you might think, all of this is lovely, but what if I don't want to run a GSA client on my client machine? Or what if I can't because there isn't one available? Well, what we've got is the ability to use a branch office connection. So we go from the customer premises equipment, or the CPE, we go from that through an IPsec IKEv2 tunnel to the edge. And that terminates the connection and then applies all the great features of the secure service edge. Now, you might think, well, how does our branch office know how to route traffic? Well, here, what we're doing is we're advertising through Border Gateway Protocol. So Border Gateway, or BGP, advertises the routes. I've mentioned conditional access policy a number of times, and we're probably all familiar with conditional access policy. A couple of new features in conditional access policy. Number one, when we can actually say, if you are going with Microsoft 365 traffic, impose this conditional access policy. If you're going with internet traffic, this one, and if you're going with private traffic, bring in another policy. So we could have different CAs depending on which traffic profile we're using. And then when we're going to the application, again, we're running a CA policy to go to the app. And what we can do here is say that you can only go to the app if you're coming from a compliant network location, i.e. from our ZTNA network. If you're trying to go directly over the internet, you'll be blocked. So that's another nice conditional access policy feature that's been introduced. Let's do a demo of all this. So I'm going to start off with this demo with a tour of the portal, and then we'll look at the client to M365 access. So here's my portal in the Microsoft Entra Admin Center. Notice the rename in there, Microsoft Entra ID, Azure AD. Right, let's go off into the Get Started on Global Secure Access, and what we've got is the Microsoft Entra Internet Access and the Microsoft Entra Private Access. And if you click on Get Started, it will take you over to the appropriate documentation. If we go to our dashboard, on our dashboard, we can see a number of things going on. Well, I've got a very small test environment. I've got 2 devices. I've got 2 users. I do have 40 workloads in my environment. But in terms of testing the global secure access, I only have 2 devices and 2 users. But what we can see is cross-tenant access. And down here it says configure universal tenant restrictions, whatever they are. We'll come back to that. And then we've got the top user destinations being shown as well. Okay, so that's a really useful dashboard. Next thing, under devices, what we've got is clients, and this is where you download the client to go on your Windows 10 or 11 operating system. Okay, there is a requirement. It needs to be Azure AD join the device. Reason being, of course, because that initial tunnel it's going to create is device authenticated as well. So that's where we get our client from. And then if we're going to do a branch office, we create a remote network. And I will come back on that. So in terms of private access, we've got quick access and we've got enterprise applications. Again, I will come back on both of those. Now, there's some global access settings, and one of them is the session management. And if we look at session management, we have 2 options here. Tenant restrictions, and this is where we can use the network for doing tenant restrictions. Again, I'll come back to what tenant restrictions are. And then you've got adaptive access, which is where we've got signaling that can be used in conditional access and also in continuous access evaluation. And also it does client IP restoration. So we actually know the address that the client were coming from rather than the point where we come into the secure edge. Then under here also we have the ability of setting up logging, and this is one thing they've done. There's a lot of really good logging for SharePoint. Teams is to come shortly. Exchange is to come as well. So enhanced logging and faster logging as well takes place. And then if we go down under secure, you'll see policy profiles and web filtering policy. And if you click on one of those, you'll come up with this message here. This message will say to you, join our private preview, because this is part of internet access and it is to follow. And that will apply to the web filtering policy as well. We go down to connect and I look at traffic forwarding. And at the moment, we've got 2 traffic forwarding profiles, one for M365, one for private access. There will be an internet one at some point. Then if we go on and actually look at connectors, and I've got my private connectors, again, it's using an application proxy connector, and I will come back on that. And then finally, down here in the UX, we've got monitoring, and we've got audit logs, and those are really good and powerful, but again, they're finishing that feature off. We got traffic logs, which will log all your traffic in the ecosystem. And we've got also the enriched M365 logs and workbooks for doing analysis on our logged data. Let's go to our client and actually look at some of this going on. So I've got on my client, I have the GSA client installed. It's currently disconnected. So with it disconnected, let's do some pinging. So we're going to ping the XDS dev, and it's coming out at 13 as a IP. Ping XDF's, ping login.microsoftonline.com. And again, it's coming out with a 40 IP. Let's now go to SharePoint. And we're going directly to SharePoint. We're not coming in through the security service edge. So let's now enable the client. And what I'm going to do once it's enabled, I'm going to also actually switch users, because this will cause my user to re-authenticate to the network. And there we are. And there's our re-authentication of the network. James Bond, and we've got another one. Okay, I'll come back to that, why we've got two. You might be able to guess, but I'll come back to it. Now, if I do my ping to log on Microsoft Online, I'm going to 6.6, and if I do my ping to SharePoint, I'm going to 6.6 again. I'm going in on the edge. If I go across to the SharePoint itself, I'm now connecting through my security service edge into SharePoint, which is really great. What I can do is I can actually look at this traffic. I've got a connection diagnostics here. I'm going to turn that on. And if we look at the hostname acquisition, we'll see it acquires very shortly. And then I can look at the flows. So I'm going to start off by going back to SharePoint. And having gone to SharePoint, we'll go to Outlook as well. And both of those are going through the secure service edge. So let's look at that traffic. And we can see it's there. So we got SharePoint, and then we've got Outlook.office365.com. So it's actually being captured. This is a useful tool to have available. So now, if we look at the sign-in logs I have to get it right, Entra ID. All right. So we've got in here, we've got James Bond's come in. And he has just come in to the private network. That was his first login. And then if we look at the next login, we'll see that James Bond has come in on the M365 network profile. So 2 authentications. All right. But we've got conditional access running if we want to. We've got this sign-in that's happening. So actually, let's go and look to see what we could do. So I'm going to go to a policy, and I've got a policy already cooked down here. And if we look at my policy 27, what we can see is we've got users, and it's very much focused on my users I'm testing with. So I have my user James Bond. The target resource now is a network profile, and I'm targeting Microsoft 365 traffic. And what I want to happen is when we're going to, James Bond is going to Microsoft 365 traffic, I'm going to grant. But I'm going to grant access subject to him agreeing the M365 network terms of use. So that, if you want to get access, you've got to sign up to the terms of use. So let's actually enable this. And I'm going to save that. And now let's go and experience this. So I'm going to come back over into my client. I'm going to come in here and switch user, which is going to cause re-authentication to the network. I'm going to go in as James Bond again. And this time, James Bond is being asked to agree the terms of use. So our conditional access has come into play. Now, I could have done MFA to catch the network, but, you know, James is on a Windows Azure AD registered machine. He's actually got strong authentication already. So it wouldn't have shown much by turning it on because it's already got strong authentication. So we're going to agree the terms of use. So we're going to read this comprehensively, accept that. And having accepted that, we're going to go in as James Bond for the other network. Now, there were no terms of use on the other network. Okay. Now, what I want to do now is look at a slightly different policy. And this is the policy when I'm going to SharePoint. So here it's James Bond. The application is SharePoint. And now I'm saying the condition when I go to SharePoint is any location. So this policy will apply to any location excluding the compliant network. So edge network locations. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is actually have a look at what I'm going to do in terms of control and I'm going to block access. So I'm going to block access to any access to SharePoint unless it comes from the compliant network. So let's try that out and see what happens. So we'll go on there, we'll save that. And now what we'll do is we will just check that we can get to SharePoint, which we can. As expected, we're coming across the compliant network. And then what we're going to do is we're going to disable the client. So we're going to pause the client, and then we're going to go to SharePoint again. And we're going to go in and log in as James Bond. And he says he can't get there. All right. And the reason being, of course, is that SharePoint's detected that you, well, not SharePoint, but the system's detected that you are not coming from a compliant network, and so is blocking access. Right, let's resume. So we're going to go back. It's already got our tokens, so I don't have to sign in again. And now we go to SharePoint. And connect as James, and we're in, which is perfect. Okay, so in terms of the devices, we have the clients, but we also have the ability to have a remote network. And by the way, I recorded this this part of the video before I realized I'd misspelt my branch. It should be branch 101. So if I look at links, what I've got in here is I've got the primary and the secondary links. So I've got two links coming from the Microsoft environment to my branch office. If I look at my traffic profiles, it actually shows I can't select the internet traffic profile and I can't select private at the moment, but it shows it's M365 traffic. So at the moment, the branch environment works with M365 traffic. So now, if I go and have a look at my customer premises equipment, which happens to be an Azure VNG, I can see that I've actually got two connections. If I look at the BGP routing, what I'll see is that this particular CPE has acquired all of the routes. And where did it get those routes from? It got them via BGP advertising. So that's client to M365 connectivity. So what I want to do now is look at internet access. Oh, I can't. So we'll have to come back to this on another video later on when it goes into public preview. It's about to go into private. Private is under NDA, and I can't talk about anything that is in the private preview. So private access is where we access applications that are private to us and probably not on the internet. What we have in private access is we have the security service edge, which is going to talk down to a remote endpoint. And that remote endpoint could be on-prem, it could be in another cloud. It's basically getting us to applications that are not on the internet. So we have to have this remote endpoint, which is connected through a secure tunnel into the security service edge. The beauty of this is that it supports connections via IP, fully qualified domain names, and ports. So we got IP ranges, we can use fully qualified domain name wildcards are supported as well. Right at this moment, it only supports TCP. UDP support will be coming. And it allows connections to HTTP, HTTPS, RDP, SSH, SMB, and so on. Okay, but as I say, the restriction at the moment is that it only uses TCP protocol. How do we publish an application? Very easily. We basically create an application segment which has a destination type, which could be IP, it could be a range of addresses, or it could be a fully qualified domain name. And then we specify a port. It's using effectively the application proxy connector. Now, if you're familiar with the application proxy connector, what you'd normally do is have an external URL. You don't have that anymore. This is basically published and known about by the security service edge. So the security service edge can route traffic appropriately. So it can route traffic to 10.0.0.27 and know which connector to send it down to. Also, you do not have any internal URLs. It's all done on IP, FQDN, and port number. And the other thing is it's represented, this connection, via an enterprise application. And with enterprise applications, of course, you can assign users to them, and you need to assign a user to get access, and you can apply conditional access policy. Now, there's two flavors of this. There's quick access, and the idea of quick access gives you quick access and setting up to access to lots of different applications. Problem with quick access, it's a single enterprise app, so it's a single conditional access for all of your quick access published applications. We can also do per app access, in which case we have individual enterprise apps representing the apps which are in the cloud. In this situation, we can have conditional access that is applied to all of the different apps in your cloud or in your on-premise environment. In terms of routing, well, what happens is the traffic forwarding profile has the routing information added to it. So if you go from your client to 10.0.0.7, your client doesn't have access to that at all. But the client knows to send that to the edge. And then the security service edge knows that, 10.0.0.7, I need to send it over that connector to get to its target system. And of course, the connection is actually gated as well, so conditional access. So let's have a demo of private access. Here I am in the portal again, and what I'm going to do is go down and find quick access. And what we can see is under quick access is that we've actually just published a number of paths, application paths or application segments. So on 10.0.0.7, 3389 has been published. Again, 10.0.0.7, 445, and 10.0.0.7, port 80. Now, of course, I could actually have different destinations, and those destinations could be defined by a fully qualified domain name, or even a range of IP addresses. And then I've got a connector group that I'm using which is my NAS Europe connect group, which is actually allowing it to connect down to my environment, which is my test environment. This is why I've got RDP on a domain controller, so I should have separated that out as another application. Let's go and have a look at the user experience. And if we look on here, I'm going to my IIS server using 10.0.0.7. So, the client knows nothing about 10.0.0.7, but the GSA client running on here, or the agent if you like, knows to forward that to the security service edge. If we look at another one on here, I've got my domain controller. I've got RDP directly to it. So I'm connecting. This is actually using quick access. So I could have a conditional access policy on quick access saying to make this connection, you must use MFA. if we go down there, that is our domain controller. And then last but not least, I'll just show you a connection to SMB. And this is an SMB connection to a file share. And there's our data on the file share. And we're actually going to read that data from the text file. Okay, so that's really quite nice. Let's look at the sort of per application publishing, if you like. But before we do that, let's go into identity and look at enterprise applications. And if we search in enterprise applications, what we'll find is quick access. So quick access appears in enterprise applications. It means that we can apply conditional access to it. We can also assign users. So you can't gain access to quick access unless you've been assigned. And I come in here and I look under policies and I just go new policy. And I come in and let's just look at a target resource just to show that quick access is there. And there it is. But remember, quick access is we're bundling together access to a number of applications through connectors. And actually, it might be nice to publish them individually, which we can do. And I've got an individual app published down here. So we go to the enterprise applications. And there's my Web Hub app. And if I select that, I can look at network access properties and we can see that we're using a fully qualified domain name. It's www.one.users.xdshub.com and it's going to go to port 80. And we're using the same connector group to come through. So let's actually just experience that. And I'm just going to go back to my client. And I'm going to go to my target using a fully qualified domain name. And there we are, successfully connected. So that's private access for you. Our next thing to do is to look at universal tenant restrictions. When a user is on your corporate network, preventing them signing in using an external Entra ID tenant account or an MSA account is a challenge. The reason being is you might have genuine users that need to sign in to a tenant, and that's your tenant, right? Or they might need to sign in with an MSA account. So how do we decide how to block this? If it was signing into Google, signing into Okta, signing into OneLogin, we can just block it through a firewall rule. But we can't block access to login.microsoftonline.com. How do we manage it? Well, we manage it with tenant restrictions, and there are actually 3 flavors of tenant restrictions. There's tenant restrictions V1, and with tenant restrictions V1, it was down to a network administrator to apply header tagging with a list of allowed tenant accounts into your customer premises equipment. You had to get a network administrator involved in doing that. So you've got to do SSL interception, you've got to do tagging, there's no granularity, it's all or nothing. We can't do it on a per user basis, we can't do it on a per application basis. It doesn't prevent token injection or anonymous access. The data path is not protected. And remote clients are going to need to hairpin via your corporate network. What happened is we tagged, and then when we go to login.microsoftonline.com, the Entra ID looks at the tagging and allows or blocks authentication based on the tenant list, which is in the tagging. So that was V1. It came along with V2. And the nice thing about V2 is that we can actually define the tenant restrictions through the portal. So that's a possibility. We can bring it down to user group and application granularity. The problem with V2 tenant restrictions is that the tenant restrictions are applied as a group policy to the operating system. And then the browser is going to do the tagging for you. The problem is it only works with an Edge browser. .NET applications such as PowerShell are not supported. So although it's really quite nice, it protects not only the authentication path, but it protects against anonymous access. It also protects the data path. So if you've got a token injection, it will protect you for that, for M365 apps. Then along comes universal tenant restrictions. And this works when you're going to the edge. And the tagging is automatically done at the edge. So it has all the advantages of TRV2, so anonymous, it does authentication, and it also does actual data path access. And it works with all GSA clients. That's a single client running the GSA client, and it also works for branch office. Let's have a little demo. So I'm going to go into my portal, and I'm going down to cross-tenant access settings. And if we look at those cross-tenant access settings and the default settings for that, and we're looking for tenant restrictions, we can see that external users and groups all are blocked. So this is when you're using an external account to go to an external resource, right? It's blocked. And then we've got external applications, again, are all blocked. Let's actually go and have a look at this in action. But before we do, I'm actually going to pause my tenant. So I'm going to go off to my demo SharePoint site, right, with my tenant paused, and I'm going to sign in as Adele. So Adele signs in, and she should have access because we've got no tenant restrictions in. We've just turned off the GSA client. Okay, let's turn the client back on. And so my user sitting on my corporate network on my device is going to use a an external identity. So we're signing in as Adele again. And this time access is blocked. Let's go back and have a look at the tenant restrictions in a bit more detail. So rather than using the defaults, I want to create one for an organization. And this is the organization I want Adele to be able to go to. And I need a tenant ID. So I'm going to drop the tenant ID in there for Contoso. So that is my tenant. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down to the tenant restriction settings for Contoso. And I'm going to, rather than inherit it from default, I'm going to change that to customize settings. And I'm going to allow access, but I'm going to do it for just Adele. So what I need to do is contact the Contoso admin and get Adele's OID. So we'll just drop in Adele's OID in here. And then I'm going to further enhance it by going to external applications, and I'm going to allow access to a selected external application, and this is just SharePoint. So we'll look for SharePoint in here, and that's the external application I'm going to allow Adele to gain access to using her external tenant account. Okay, so that set up that lot. So let's go to my demo SharePoint. Remember, this was previously blocked. So we're going to sign in as Adele. And having signed in as Adele, we should, in theory, be able to gain access. And yes, we can. Okay, so that's really good. And now let's go to Outlook and see what happens here. And again, we're going to choose our account that we're going to Outlook with. And we'll put in our password. And this, in theory, should be blocked, which it is, which is fantastic. Now, the beauty of this is it works with branch office scenarios as well. So here I'm on my branch client. I've got no GSA client installed on here. I'm going to go off to SharePoint, and I'm going to sign into SharePoint as Adele. And that should work. Come on, SharePoint. So there's Adele going into SharePoint, and I'm hoping this will be successful, which it is. And then if we go to Outlook, this will be blocked, right? And because the tenant restrictions and the tagging applies to our branch office scenario as well. So that's from the branch office. Thanks for watching this session to the end. Now you know what Microsoft Entra Global Secure Access is and its key components. And that's Microsoft Entra Internet Access and Microsoft Entra Private Access. Watch this space where I'll do some deep dives in this technology. Don't forget to subscribe and keep learning. Oh, and click that bell. I'll see you next time in the cloud. Thanks for watching my channel. Subscribe for more free training. You might like to join me for my Identity Masterclass. Hopefully, see you soon.